this is the season for applications. It's also the season for writing recommendations. There's a lot of folks out there like us who are writing those recommendations, and I think there's just there's 3 pointers I would kind of give you along those lines. Number one is stay in touch with the people who are writing you these letters. Don't write them the night before to say, I'm applying for these 7 jobs or these 7 applications. Would you write me a letter by tomorrow? They need to know what you've been doing over a period of time. You can't expect them to turn on a dime and do something literally overnight. So, when you're in touch with that faculty member, they need to know what you've been doing before the letter that you're writing them. Say, I need a letter tomorrow. Secondly, the world of writing recommendations has gotten a lot more complicated. When I started teaching 27 years ago, I would deliver my letter to, this is at the University of Wisconsin, to an office that would then send my letter out to the prospective fellowships or the prospective jobs that my students were applying for. Kind of one letter served all. Now that's no longer the case. We are sending probably, I'm probably writing maybe 50, 80, 100 different letters in the course of a month or two. They're going to multiple websites. I don't know how many websites these letters are going on to. We need to be reminded. You need to write us a long email saying, here are the 14 fellowships I'm applying for, here are the 12 jobs I'm applying for, here are the links, here are the addresses, here are the people to whom you address the letter. I think we're past the date where you would also supply envelopes and stamps. It's really about everything on the web these days. But, it's really easy to forget writing a letter for someone unless I have really clear guidelines about what things are due when, where they go, and what the heck this one, particular fellowship is that you're applying for. So there's a kind of advisor or recommender etiquette that I think is really important for all of you to be thinking of, because we're thinking about it a lot. This is like the only things that we're doing these days right now, too. And third, and this has been said a lot, but it's worth saying again, when you're writing that letter or that application, you're not writing for us. Us, in this case, being your advisor or your recommenders. You're writing for that audience, the reader of the New Yorker or the Sunday Times, maybe not your mother or your father, but you're writing for a general educated reader. You're not going to be having people in your direct area reading that direct application. So keep realizing that. You want to sound smart, you are smart. That's not the issue. The issue is whether or not you're having that conversation, as Franco said, with an educated reader, but by no means a specialist.
Hi, I'll probably be the first of many to say thank you for this panel and all the great advice. Something that still remains a mystery, other than the entire process, it's pretty mysterious, is you guys were all talking a lot about details. You don't give too many details, but you have to give some details. And I was wondering if you would be able to give possibly some concrete examples of, or maybe just a further explanation of what that sweet middle ground is. Because you don't want to overwhelm people with a really long title of a work that they don't care about and aren't going to care about, but you do want to prove that you have a piece of literature you're looking at if you're in literature. So I was just wondering if maybe you guys could clarify that kind of nice middle ground for details.
Okay. So I can start out. When I was talking about details and being specific, for me, it was more sort of practical things like budget. So if you're writing a budget into a grant, be really specific about what you're buying, how much of it you're buying, how much it costs. So you have to get on the internet and just kind of look at prices and stuff like that. And why you need it has to be said. The other thing that you need to be specific about is if you're applying for something like the Dean's Dissertation Grant, you have to say how you're going to be using your time, because they fund you for a year to do your research. So what's your schedule going to look like for that year? So yeah, for me, I think that would be where I say be specific. Someone else want to add to that?
About details. This is a very good question, I think, because it's something that I don't have like a clear answer. I can just provide example that maybe were for me good and well. For instance, if you start your application, of course you have to frame your dissertation, your project in a broader field or in a broader question. If you're applying to a very theoretical institution that is that is going to work on pretty much on theory, of course you want to start instead of from raw facts, maybe from larger questions. Whereas if you're in a historical institute that you see, I don't know, it's making a lot of research on, I don't know, economical, the economical background of some historical facts. Maybe like starting from raw facts could be the right detail, which doesn't mean that you have to analyze that historical fact or that raw fact intensively, but just to give you a sort of, again, common ground for a discussion. Another important thing is that methodology. I think that provide a minimum of how I'm going to do that from an intellectual point of view without being too overbearing is important. Like, I like, not I like is just a word that you don't have to use in an application, in my opinion. But I use this kind of methodology because I want to prove this, but I'm aware of the others. This is already a way to enter in a discussion. Maybe the professor that's on the other side is famous for using the other, and maybe it can just be interested in see what you can, not you can learn, but what you can discuss with you. So,
I think, let me, to try one version of this. Last year when in the application that I made, and the application that eventually was funded, my collaborator and I began by describing particular photographs. We had various options, various processes that seemed to do the same thing. I'm being generic so that I don't sort of overwhelm you with details, but we had this one set of photographs that concerned the splint, something to hold a femur and the leg together. And the whole argument was that, in a way, what was most important was not the splint, it was the blanket covering the body, because the whole idea was a matter of body temperature. The project was about sciences of the body that tried to work on regulation, on the ways in which the body regulates itself, and how this is discovered and engaged around World War I. Now, I had details that I could give in terms of, let's say, histamine response. Yeah, not exactly the best way to go. In terms of wound shock, but then I have to explain all of what wound shock is and what the difference is between surgical shock. And then I have sort of 9 separate authors who fall under these categories, and no, the blanket sort of covered the point in a way. It was about blood temperature. I could then proceed to say, chapter 2 will deal with wound shock. It's different from surgical shock and shell shock, and so on and so forth. So it's about strategic use of things that you can imagine somebody working with. And then the ability, in a way, to move from the concrete details that you begin with and a description that feels rich into something else. I absolutely agree with what John Zimmerman said before. It is a huge amount of luck involved in every single thing. But I do think that was a better description than other descriptions I've offered. I was, let's say, more confident about that one because I felt that there was a way in which I was giving a path in by strategically using the details that I had. Now, obviously, I'm giving you an example that feels fairly vivid by comparison to other ones. In literature as well, you need to assume that if you're writing on 3 authors, these may be two of these authors are potentially known to your audience or to parts of your audience. A third one might not be. That's fine. You might not need to work on every single detail, and you certainly don't need to begin with an image that does this. But you need to be able to begin with something that says, I am engaged with problem X. This problem matters because of Y, and the reason these 3 authors do it is this. If a sort of strong opening will give you a space for then later deploying particular details that would say, I am going to do this type of reading of that particular section, but won't necessarily feel like you started on, this is tricky, pretending to be using an example. But you see what I'm getting at, that there's a way in which it's about how you're going to deploy them. And not about saying, here's the most visible image. It's about how you're going to manage them. these kinds of details so that somebody not interested in your subject might be able to work with you. It will be willing to work with you. I think that would be the expression I would want to say. Yeah. I'll try to come up with something smarter as an example.
Since we talked about rejections, so some grants will, if you get to a certain stage, they will give you the feedback from the readers, right? In your experience, how do you then, if you reapply to that grant, what would you suggest as a good strategy? Just deal with what the readers noted, or really sort of take a second look at it and try to go in maybe even different directions, or should you be conservative and just deal with what the readers said you should deal with, or should you actually think about doing something different?
Go.
Okay, so I think you can treat it a lot like how you would treat any kind of revisions. If you want to, we're constantly revising our work based on feedback we get from our advisors and stuff like that. So sometimes you will get really specific comments that you can address. But then definitely once you have a draft, take it to someone else to read over. Maybe someone who's outside your field, or someone who, hasn't been an audience for that particular work before. So you can really, obviously the best case scenario is that you would do both, I think.
In a way, imagine, so the people who are most likely to read the application next time they're not likely to be the same people as those who came before. Well, obviously there are different grants, right? In some cases you're applying to something like a standing committee. But you shouldn't assume that that's the case. You need to be able to integrate some of the things that they've said, or at least to figure out how you bypass those kinds of problems. They might be pointing out problems that do not seem germane to the project, as far as you're concerned. That means that you're not doing a good enough job of describing, you're leaving yourself open to that particular kind of criticism. Sometimes working with an editor does the same thing for you. You just sort of get the editor's comments back on an essay and you think, this doesn't make any sense. Why would this essay have to go in that direction? The point is you've opened yourself up to that particular criticism, and that might be the most efficient way for them to handle what it is that you were doing. But they're not sure themselves exactly what it is that will go. So flagrantly ignoring comments that have been made is not going to work to your advantage. But integrating something of them, or some of them, in the event that the same person is on the committee, or in the event that is actually a good argument, should be a pathway for you to be able to then rethink the application a little bit as a whole. It's a little bit like, I was thinking, as Kara was speaking, I was thinking like, shopping right as you're going to prepare a particular meal. You're on the phone and, I don't know, I'm on the phone and my wife says, you know what, I don't think that it's a good idea to use, I don't know, carrots in that recipe. Well, okay, I can remove them. I might have to put something else instead. And maybe I have to sort of address the whole thing a little bit. Or as I'm thinking of the recipe, I have to figure out what takes its place. Carrots are obviously not the best example in this case. But you see what I'm getting at. You have to somehow amend the whole system a little bit. And it might be that this is you can use them as a good prompt as to where you go. I think you'll find much the same thing with comments from journals, for example. You can always think that a reviewer might be, how could they possibly have read what it is that you wrote in the way that they did? Well, there is some sort of opening, and there will be some way of handling the thing that allows you to move to a new stage that will let everything be much better. Sorry, that was longer than I meant it to be.
Well, actually, instead of providing an example, I may try with a suggestion what I would do in such a case, and what I actually did in the past when I was rejected. And we are still within NYU, so we're not applying for. I think it's also time to apply for postdocs and stuff like that. But as I was saying before, look at the website, the other I mean, people who got the job or who got the grant, they have their own project. But within NYU, I would just think, hey, this is, I don't know, the GSAS summer fellowship, and I know those two people from another department who got it. I would ask them kindly to read their application. So I see an application that has nothing to do with what I did, and I put them together. And then you can understand the weaknesses, but also the points of strength, because it might be the case that the pattern is the same, but this other application from this other department was much more convincing for the different rhetoric or for a different position of the paragraphs. But I mean, seeing what other people do might be a good answer.
In the way that Franco is describing it, there is a form for it. You're not going to be the same person as somebody else who got this, who got the same grant. Yeah. And you may write in a very different style. You may not only write in a very different style, but show expertise in a different fashion. All of these things are things that you can then think, how is it that I'm doing it? You don't have to obey somebody else's form in this form. You have to be able to work with it to see in what way it helps you advance what it is that you were doing already. In terms of particular comments, I think if it's a particular committee, you need to be respectful to that committee, and you need to be able to figure out how you do it again. Sometimes when you do it again, you sort of feel like the project has changed anyway, so that's a little easier.
One last point by Franco.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add that, for instance, 1 year has passed, and maybe you achieved something in the meantime. So I would add all the ideas that I have in the meantime, because probably the ideas of last year were not developed enough.
And can I just say, typically it's not the case that you receive extensive comments from rejected grants. That's really only happened to me once with a really big grant.